And the Taliban is now promising amnesty, as we mentioned, and urging women to join the government. But many women in Kabul haven't even left their homes out of fear. Under the previous Taliban rule, women in many cases were not allowed to go to school. They had to have their full body covered, and they needed guardians to accompany them in the streets. So the big question now, is this the same Taliban? ABC News Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz has more.
This was a smarter, more media-savvy Taliban, one that caught the Biden administration off guard. As Taliban forces entered the presidential palace in Kabul over the weekend, Taliban senior leaders were huddled around a laptop, apparently watching their men via live stream. And just like anybody living in the modern age, Twitter is one of its primary weapons in controlling their message. Now posting direct-to-camera messages from rooftops, sharing their locations and assuring their followers the city is under control. Their leader, rarely seen in public, a former Taliban judge. Senior leaders claiming they want to form an inclusive Islamic government. The group is establishing a civilian casualty prevention and complaints commission, tweeting out WhatsApp phone numbers for Afghans to send in complaints. But the previous Taliban rule of Afghanistan was brutal and oppressive. Women had no rights and violence was rampant. And though this new Taliban claim they're not opposed to women attending school, many fear that's not true and that the hard-fought progress of the last 20 years will be erased.
When it comes to the Taliban, while they want to improve themselves, at the same time, they want to rule the country in a certain way, and that involves some oppression of women and not letting women experience the full freedoms in which they deserve. It also involves maintaining connection and ties and relationships to various terrorist groups.
This more organized, controlled facade, reportedly funded by some less than honorable sources, like the production, taxing, and smuggling of poppy, a leading export that goes to the manufacturing of heroin. And while they do have a collection of international private donors, in the past they have collected money through kidnapping for ransom. Their reported biggest expense, weapons and training. And the group itself remains a designated terrorist organization under U.S. and UN sanctions. A U.S. intelligence report earlier this year warned al-Qaeda is still entrenched in their leadership, although they pledged to deny safe haven to terrorists under a deal with President Trump. Countries like Iran, Russia, and China say they are willing to deal with the Taliban. China saying it's ready for friendly and cooperative relations. Questions remain about what role Afghanistan's neighbor and nuclear power Pakistan played in the Taliban victory. The country nurtured the Taliban and was often accused of meddling in the war. Experts say what the Taliban ultimately wants is power and to rule their own Islamic State, a return to the way things were when they last ruled. But there's a very real and immediate threat to those who once stood in their way.
They probably are going to want to exert some degree of punishment against the Afghans who work with us because they'll see them as threats. It's unclear what degree of punishment that will be, but it could even include executions.
And the Taliban is now trying to stop local Afghans from leaving, with some reports they are going door to door looking for those they consider enemies. Diane?
All right, Martha Raddatz, thank you for that. And despite claims the Taliban has changed, the extremist group is still a designated terrorist organization, and we're also seeing posters of women without burqas already being torn down and painted over. There are also very few women out in the streets. Let's bring in senior fellow at New York University Center for Global Affairs and fellow at the Center for International Cooperation, Rina Amiri, for more on this. Rina, thanks so much for being here. The Taliban is now claiming that the Islamic Emirate, what they're calling Afghanistan, doesn't want women to be victims. But women in Kabul are hiding inside their homes out of fear for what might happen to them. How do you expect this to play out?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, women are hiding in their homes. They're hiding in their homes because the Taliban has been coming to their doors. I've received so many calls where they have been intimidating them and their families. They've come with lists of names. They're going into their offices, looking through their material. They're creating a climate of incredible repression and threat. The Taliban have a fantastic strategic communications initiative. Operation, but it doesn't line up with their actions on the ground. What we see in Afghanistan is not a new Taliban that's better for women. We see one that's more strategic, more brutal, and far more effective. So the women are much more frightened because also now the Taliban control all of Afghanistan as opposed to 96% of Afghanistan, which they did before the U.S. intervention.
Now, do you believe... sorry, go ahead.
No, please, proceed.
Well, I was just wondering if you think that women who've been activists or kind of leaders in the community there, are they in extra danger?
Yes, they're on kill lists. They have received repeatedly clear information from the Taliban that they are on lists. And within hours of taking over provinces, they are at their doors and demanding to know where they are. And of course, these women are immediately going into hiding, but their families are being terrorized. This is why it is urgent for this administration to create a humanitarian corridor for these women and other human rights defenders to leave when they feel under threat, to provide them air support, to establish a senior humanitarian and a refugee coordinator to help this population. It's laudable that the administration wants to help those that work directly for the U.S., but these are the U.S.'s strongest allies and supporters, the women and the human rights defenders in the country, and they are being abandoned to a terrible fate.
Now, this is a very different female Afghan population than the one the Taliban ruled over 20 years ago. Women and girls are now educated. They're accustomed to certain freedoms. They know what's at stake. So how does that impact all of this?
They know what's at stake. They're the greatest potential of Afghanistan. This is probably the greatest gain that Afghanistan has had in the last 2 decades. The women and the youth that have taken the window that the U.S. helped create in the last 20 years to create an entirely different possibility for Afghanistan. That is gone now. The Taliban do not care what these women offer in terms of capacity because it doesn't align with their radical ideology. The Taliban have never said, you've never been able to pin them down, that they will, in fact, support women and their freedoms in a way that's actually meaningful. What they've said, it's according to Islam. That's what they said in the 1990s when women were prisoners under their home, and it was the most draconian regime, Islamic regime in the world.
All right, Rina Amiri, we appreciate your time today and your analysis. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.